Perfect.
You're good to go.
Excellent. So I'm gonna go in. I take over. Hold just a second. I need to start on the first slide, not on the last one. That will help, I think. See, I tried to prepare and I still, here we go. So you'll see I go up and down. That's because I'm working between 2 computers, 3 monitors. So good afternoon. Welcome everybody to our aerospace education classroom. And today we are going to talk about civil air patrols, emergency response to natural hazard and disasters. Depending on time, we might have a chance to go into counter-drug missions, but also intercept missions are very important missions to help with defense and local authorities. For these presentation, we decided to go in the format of a panel discussion. But before we start, I have to do my safety briefing. Always safety briefing, CAP #1 rules. We are all safety officers. Even though you're home, I want to make sure that you all have your wing person near you so that if you encounter any emergency, you have somebody to contact, to call on. If you don't, send us a note in the chat and we will make sure that we keep an eye on you and that we can call the emergency contact that we have on file. But I'm hoping everything will be okay in these 2 hours. You are in an environment where there's electronics, so please be careful not to trip on any cables. Do not electrocute yourself. It's very painful. I try it, don't do it. And the other very important thing is stay hydrated. Even though it's 2 hours, stay hydrated and keep your fluids away from your electronic as they are not compatible at all. And that can cause some problem with your equipment, but you can also get electrocuted. So please take care of yourself and keep an eye on each other. So for this presentation, we have a panel discussion that will be led by Lieutenant Colonel Wallace. And for those who don't know me, before I switch, I am the Washington All Mission Academy Aerospace STEM and Cyber Educator, and I'm also the Director of Aerospace Education for the Washington Wing. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace is going to be our moderator, but he also represents the AFRCC. We also have in the audience Gregory Moore from the FAA, Dean Richardson from CAPUSAF, Chris Etzinger from the Washington Military Department of State Emergency Management. You'll talk more about it, the EMD. We have Colonel Ernest Schnabler, former wing commander and Cowlitz County Emergency Management, and our very own Lieutenant Colonel Cal Moore, CAP, for present, Operation Emergency Services and Communication, but also he has lots of experience for heavy work that was done and working in collaboration with FEMA. So I want to thank all our panelists for coming and sharing these 2 hours with us. We're really looking forward to hearing from you, learning from you. And for the audience, if you have any comments or questions, please post them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and as things are going, I will jump in and ask you questions to the participants, or depending on your question, I might ask you to unmute and ask you questions directly. From there, I am handing the mic over to Lieutenant Colonel Wallace. Thank you for participating.
Oh, thank you very much, Major Komarsek, for the introduction and the safety briefing, getting us all going. I want to thank actually all the panel participants and the students as well, because without you, there'd be no reason to do this. So this is really great. Quick introduction for myself. At least it was my call sign. I kind of go by Wally, being that with a last name like Wallace, it it works really well. And when you're in a squadron or a work environment that we have multiple Johns, Wally gets my attention pretty well. So I've gone by Wally in most of my working career. A little quick introduction. I'm have not been in Civil Air Patrol really that long. I started actually was recruited by Colonel Schnabler when I was working for the Clark Regional Emergency Services Agency, or CRESA, down in Clark County, and went through some of the training and got, of course, through that work, got all of my FEMA training done through that. But before that, 25 years in the Air Force, 20 of which was in combat rescue under the what used to be the old Air Rescue Service, and it became combat rescue, and also qualified as a Rescue Coordination Center controller, or RCC controller, and been able to work all kinds of places all over the world, but working with the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center. Been working with those folks for years, and you'll all feel sorry for me. My last duty station was at the satellite location, which is now Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, which is in Honolulu, Hawaii. So I spent my last 5 years in the Air Force in Hawaii. So that was a pretty rough duty, but we ran the Pacific Rescue Coordination Center there, and also were subordinate to the Rescue Coordination Center, or the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center. That time it was at Langley Air Force Base, and the Rescue Coordination Center is currently at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. And those personnel, while Civil SAR is a mission of the United States Air Force, personnel recovery for both for all branches of services is one of the missions that the AFRCC also coordinates with. And you'll find AFRCC members all over the world, including deployed in every command in the Air Force. So they do quite a bit of TDY. Real quickly, as far as what does the Rescue Coordination Center really do for Civil Air Patrol? When we have a civil emergency, whether it be small or large, we are looking for Civil Air Patrol as a participant, particularly for whether it be for emergency locating transmitters, or ELTs, all the way up to a major event. And it's the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center's responsibility to issue a mission identifier. We call it an MI, and that allows the units that we've tapped to go ahead and prosecute that particular mission. Now we'll talk a little bit about how those requests get to us, but generally, depending on the severity of the incident, whether it be a lost hiker or something that would be at the sheriff's level, they have the authority to at the sheriff's department, they can contact the Rescue Coordination Center all the way up to a state issue. If it's an aeronautical problem that an air crash has occurred in a certain state, then the state can issue those mission identifiers, or at least go through RCC to get one and request assistance, and all the way up to the national level, whether it be FEMA or for other branches that really require much more extensive national resources. So that's what I was able to be a small part of, to be able to work on. And again, Civil SAR is just a part of the mission that the AFRCC carries, but it is a major one as far as the major workload that we work with. And it is joint, being that we work with Coast Guard and Navy and Army assets as well. For the Coast Guard, particularly for a lot of their what we call EPIRBs or 406 megahertz beacons, and we also monitor those as well, and we work together with that. So that's a brief explanation of what the AFRCC does, and I'm sure we're going to talk about interactions with the rest of the panelists, and we'll move on to, I guess, is Gregory Moore, is he on? No.
He's not on yet, so we can move him to the end, to afterward. I'll keep an eye. I'll let you know when he join in.
Okay, very good. Okay, he would be talking about his interaction between the FAA and the air traffic control. He's an air traffic control qualified controller, and his day job, as he tells me, is working for the Western Air Defense Sector, or WADS, at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and their sector for monitoring airspace actually goes basically from the Mississippi River all the way across CONUS to throughout the West. So they basically take the half of the United States for their NORAD defense area, and goes, of course, it's a bi-nation agreement, and sometimes commanded, NORAD is sometimes commanded by Canadian officer as well. So we'll get back to him as far as what his interactions are. But at that time, I'll go ahead and let Dean Richardson introduce himself and what he does as a civilian role is in Department of the Air Force, working with Civil Air Patrol and Air Force as a liaison.
I just see that Greg might be logged in. Do we want to give him a chance to keep his spot here?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
If you're on, Greg Moore, I just was introducing you and saying that you're as an FAA controller and working your day job at the NORAD WADS sector.
Yeah, let me see here. Yes.
We cannot hear you, sir.
Not sure what's going on here.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Mute. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you
Okay.
taking the time.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm so late. So my name is Greg Moore, and I'm with the Air Traffic Organization with the FAA. And
You got muted, sir. We can't hear you anymore.
how's that?
You're back on, sir. Thank you. Sorry,
Okay.
technology,
Sorry about that. So 44 years of air traffic experience and 39 with the FAA, 4 years military air traffic. So I worked at Tri-Cities, Spokane, down in LA at SoCal Approach, and Denver Approach. And now, as somebody mentioned, for the last 19 years, I'm the FAA headquarters liaison to Western Air Defense under NORAD. So one of the things that our organization and germane to this particular session is we're the lead in the FAA for DoD support for civil authority, so for natural disasters. And my office operates what we call the Joint Crisis Action Team back in Virginia at the command center. And the command center is the one that regulates all the traffic flows in and out of the NAS. So that's kind of the single one-stop shop for anything that goes on in the NAS, either on a routine basis or in a classified nature, and also for incidents, presidentials, all of that. So what I am involved in personally is whenever we have a hurricane, a tornado, or something where we stand up the JCAT, or the Joint Crisis Action Team, then myself and others within my office were deployed to the different state emergency operations centers and act as the FAA single point of contact. And quite often when communications are either cut off or non-existent, then we actually represent the FAA administrator. So most of us, like myself and my counterparts, have been longtime controllers, generally first line supervisors, and either second level managers like myself. So we have a lot of experience. Not to say that we don't make mistakes, we do. Not to say that we don't have all the answers, because we don't. But we certainly know a lot of people with within the FAA that we can get real-time coordination on a moment's notice. And that's who I am.
Very good introduction, Greg. I appreciate it. One of the things that we're going to be asking a little bit about is, how do you interact with the with emergency responders such as the Civil Air Patrol?
Okay, and is that, do you want me to answer that now?
That'd be great, or at least just briefly as far as what you do for at least for emergency responses, and then we'll probably go, when we look at scenarios, we'll talk about some other things.
Okay, so when we show up at the different state emergency operations centers, so like for the hurricanes that affect Texas and the Gulf states, we normally have a liaison at each state EOC, depending on the impact area. We're generally a part of the ESF1, or emergency support function. ESF1, which is transportation. And we also integrate with ESF9, which is search and rescue, and some of the other ESF functions that are related to aviation. So anything that has to do with the NAS during that particular incident, obviously the FAA, since we have plenary authority over the national airspace system, then we're the go-to for answering questions or facilitating any actions that need to be. TFRs are a big part of that. We also have what we call special advisories, or airspace coordination areas, which are a larger scope within the disaster. Like for instance, the BP oil spill, which I was involved with for 6 weeks. That was the largest TFR in US history. It was about 24,000 square miles.
Wow.
And the airspace coordination area, which encompass probably 4 different states, and merely that's an advisory or a special notice that goes out to pilots to be very vigilant during this period, and for those areas that TFRs may change on a moment's notice based on the mission needs. So when I do show up, and I'll just use me as an example, when I do show up at the state EOC, obviously I'm part of the ESF1 function immediately for the aviation part of transportation. And then generally I get seated with either the air operations branch within the state, or sometimes they're called air coordination groups, but therein is where my physical presence is, and my my relationship with Civil Air Patrol. Because generally in a larger disaster, each aviation component that has many resources, which Civil Air Patrol typically does, then they'll have a liaison, as well as National Guard, Air Guard, Army Guard, law enforcement aspects, state, civil, and they'll have a liaison within that air coordination group or air operations branch. And therein is where all the nuts and bolts and all the brain bites are expended to accommodate deconfliction plans. So within those TFRs, for instance, like Hurricane Harvey several years ago in Texas, that was pretty much the Houston and Beaumont area, which a large part of it was in Class B airspace. We had probably about 250 or 300 aircraft flying in support of that aircraft every day. So the deconfliction plans are a big deal. And like I said, Civil Air Patrol is a part of that, not only in search and rescue, but for aerial mapping, ISR, whatever your capability is. We also integrate UASs, the small UASs, and sometimes, which generally above the TFRs, because normally disaster TFRs are normally 5 to maybe 10,000 feet above the disaster, depending on the circumstance. Then we'll have Global Hawks or other UASs that are flying well above that, but they're part of the effort. And that's primarily what I do. I mean, I'm kind of the go-to person for the FAA. And like I said, like in Hurricane Harvey, we had 5 other FAA person or my counterparts within my office at the Texas AOC in Austin. Okay, pending any questions, that's primarily what I do, depending on the circumstance and the needs of the state or other users.
Great, Greg. I appreciate it. Before we move on, I have one quick question as far as if you're working here locally, whether it be at the Western Air Defense or in your jobs here, and there is an incident here, where would you actually physically go to add into an EOC? Where is that would be located? Would it be Camp Murray, or where would it be?
Well, that's a good question. So there's a little bit of a challenge in Washington State, and I grew up in Hoquiam, so I have a vested interest in this state. Mm-hmm. There's the Washington DOT Aviation Office, which is located at the Olympia Airport, and I live about a mile away from there. And Camp Murray, obviously, for the Emergency Management Division, or EOC there. They're still trying to figure out where that aviation component will be located, and there really hasn't been a defined location yet. So either one, but like what I'm trying to influence, if we have the earthquake, and we all know that that's right around the corner, right? Most of the infrastructure is going to be impacted by that earthquake, meaning bridges, overpasses, all of that. So aviation is going to be a big component in that. If my presence is needed, then obviously I could ride my bike from my house with no obstacles to get to the Olympia Airport. But if it was at Camp Murray, then I'd either have to be virtual or flown in by helicopter, because there's no way I could get there otherwise. So there's a big challenge with that. And I think that's true of any earthquake on the West Coast, because obviously transportation modal by automobile, truck, or vehicle is going to be compromised. So I think if virtual, and let's face it, during major disasters, it's a real challenge for internet or even cellular capability. I'm trying to think, it was one that we had, it was a hurricane in Florida, I think, where the cellular network obviously gets challenged because emergency pretty much has priority. But even in that particular case, it was compromised. So AT&T, and it doesn't matter whether it's AT&T, Verizon, or anybody, they were going to put up an aerostat that would have provided a limited cellular capability for that particular disaster. So there's a lot of lessons learned and that kind of thing, but let's face it, the basic premise of aviation is communication.
Yep.
And if you don't have that, then that's certainly a challenge.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That's not also on the communication. I was just talking with a specialist from AT&T who works in the division that does communication in case of incident. And they have full team that will deploy to make sure that the emergency teams can stay in communication. So they put a lot of work into that. They have a whole division in AT&T to make sure that you all can continue to communicate and collaborate, and that the help efforts are all happening properly. So that was a very good point. I also would like to thank you for explaining the acronyms you used. It's something we don't always think about, but when we're specialists, we use our technical jargon and acronyms. And I was very happy to hear you explain them when you use a new one, because we have to remember that some of us don't know them, and especially the cadets who are learning them. So thank you very much. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, I give you the mic back. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no, perfect. Hey, and thank you. We'll now move down to Dean Richardson, our CAP USAF coordinator, and find out what he does. And I'm going to be all ears because I don't know either. Thank you.
Well, hopefully I can give you a little bit of background here. For some of you that are a little bit more wizened, shall we say, you may remember my predecessor, Jim Nakuchi, was the state director. We've gone by several different names or titles over the past 20 years or so. Jim was my predecessor here in Washington. I started down in California in this job and then moved up here about 2.5 years ago. But just to give you a little bit more background, going back, my about 20 years prior to this job, 23 actually, was active duty Air Force. I was started out as an engineer, program engineer, did that for a couple of years in the Air Force, and then transitioned to pilot training. I flew C-17 most of my career, and did a couple of assignments as a instructor pilot flying T-1s down in Texas. I flew the MC-12, which is an ISR, or Intel Surveillance Reconnaissance platform, based on a King Air for a couple of years. And then that was actually my last assignment at Beale Air Force Base. Retired out of that in 2015 and came back over to this job. So give you a little bit idea, my organization is CAP USAF. And so we are essentially a parallel organization in terms of structure to CAP. We have a headquarters at Maxwell Air Force Base, just like CAP does. And in fact, right across the hall, we share the same building. Active duty 06, a colonel that is in command of our organization. And we have a staff of roughly 20 to 30 active duty and civilian folks there at Maxwell. And then we further branch down into the regions, just like you do, same 8 regions. We call them liaison regions, each led by an active duty lieutenant colonel primarily. with a staff of other folks, including myself. Regional operation directors is our current title. And so in my current role, I am the ROD, or Regional Operations Director, for Washington and Oregon. Previously, as I said, when I got hired down in California, I was working California and Nevada. For a short time, I was doing the entire West Coast because we were short on people. And I have a couple of additional duties that allow me to interact more directly with CAP mission focus areas as well. But let me back up before I get to that and talk a little bit more about what our organization is and what we do, what our purpose is. So CAP is established as essentially we call a dual hat organization by US code, Title 10 and Title 36. That code, as it establishes CAP, places the organization within the Air Force as the Air Force Auxiliary, and most of you know that. It also establishes a program management office, and that office is my organization, CAP USAF. So the arrangement that we operate with is a cooperative agreement. That cooperative agreement is managed by CAP USAF. And through that, CAP is able to receive appropriated funding from Congress through the Air Force to conduct your operations and your missions. To the tune of, I don't know the exact number anymore, but $20-some million a year that Congress appropriates to CAP. And so in that role as program manager, we essentially we consider 3 additional duties: advise, assist, and a liaison. So in those advice, we would work hand in hand with your wings, your regions, and oftentimes your units where they might need assistance. Visits occasionally. In our liaison role, we are reaching out to other federal, state, local, and in some cases tribal organizations to assist CAP in partnering, working with them. Occasionally establishing missions or maybe looking for new mission sets that you currently aren't performing. And then finally, kind of falls within our purview would be an oversight role that we would perform compliance inspections, visits, staff assistance visits, and operational mission evaluations. And some of you may have had the pleasure of getting to participate in some of those things. We're currently sort of rewickering how that looks, but those are on a time phase basis. We take a look at those things just to ensure that CAP as an organization is meeting the requirements in the cooperative agreement and the expectations of the Air Force and Congress for that funding. Now, I mentioned I have another additional role. That role is a liaison to First Air Force. So the way we are organized on the Air Force side and CAP as well as the Air Force Auxiliary falls under Air Combat Command and First Air Force. And First Air Force has responsibility essentially for the continental United States and somewhat a little bit further, but for the most part, continental United States. And CAP actually participates or conducts the majority, somewhere between 70 and 80+% of the air sorties that First Air Force oversees in the continental United States. So you all make up the majority of that effort. Now, some of the others are air defense sorties that you're probably familiar with. There may be air refueling sorties and so forth, but again, the majority of those are CAP. So we have, CAP USAF has a liaison at First Air Force, and that headquarters is down at Tyndall Air Force Base. Greg Moore mentioned Tyndall down there. We literally have a building and an air operations center right across the walk place from AFRCC. So we share the same campus there on the base. And I go down as a secondary duty to work as the liaison to First Air Force. And we would do that primarily in the event of a large event like a hurricane or a disaster response to earthquakes or, a Cascadia type event, something like that. I think that pretty much covers where I'm at. I'll kind of leave it there if there's any questions. And
very good, Dean. I appreciate your information. I've got some questions though, as far as with First Air Force, their area of responsibility, or AOR, is continental United States.
Yeah.
But how do they? How does Air Force and CAP cover other civil SAR that they're responsible for, like in Alaska, Hawaii, and let's say Puerto Rico?
So similar structure, the First Air Force Commander has actually delegated responsibility for those areas to other Air Force command structures. And in this case, Alaska falls under, I think it's 11th Air Force, and Hawaii and that Pacific area where you may be operating would fall under PACAF, so Pacific Air Forces.
Yeah, it used to be the 13th Air Force, and then they decommissioned it and became Kenny headquarters for PACAF. It's very good. All right, well, that's excellent. I always had kind of wondered how they did that as far as with that. So that's excellent. We'll come back to you again when we talk over a scenario and see how you play there as well. Moving next, we'll go back to let's see. It's I'm sorry, Chris Utziger from Washington Military Department, the EMD.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invite. And what I would like to do is share some slides with you. So okay. I am going to select this screen and share it. And my computer is saying I am sharing a screen right now. I hope that
we can see it. Very good. Thank you.
Awesome. So I am the response section manager with the Military Department's Emergency Management Division. And the picture that you are looking at here is the state EOC at Camp Murray, which is the operation of which is basically my responsibility together with its alert and warning center. And because we have a number of cadets on the line, allow me to give you a brief emergency management 101 on how incidents can scale when things go bad. So everything always starts obviously at the local level, which is at the bottom of this slide, where we have our first responders from fire departments, law enforcement, emergency medical services that under the ICS paradigm respond to an incident. If they need more resources, they typically have mutual aid agreements in place with neighboring services that they can execute to get more resources to help out. But what they can also do is rely on a local county or city emergency operations center that can support with resources. And if even additional resources are needed at this point, the city or county as well can reach out to neighboring jurisdictions to get more resources in mutual aid, or it can be elevated even a step further to the state level. And at the state level, we have the same options. If we need more resources, then we can reach out to other states in mutual aid to get more resources in, or we can escalate something to the federal level, okay? And as incidents scale up from the local level to the state level, to the federal level, obviously at each level, local elected officials or state elected officials have to declare an emergency, which then allows us to gain access to the next higher level of government. But regardless how far up an incident scales, it is always in support of the first responders that are dealing on the front lines with the incident. So basically, if you look at the arrow coming up from the bottom, what you have here are resource requests that come up and information about the situation. And what goes down from higher levels to the local jurisdictions are the resources that are needed to deal with the situation. So I operate here at the state level at the State Emergency Operations Center. And in a nutshell, the responsibilities of a state EOC are to get a situational assessment of what is going on. If you do not have an understanding of the situation that you're dealing with, then it's hard to drum up an effective response and recovery. One of the terms that we often refer to is a common operating picture, and that is just having that common understanding of what situation we're dealing with. Then obviously priorities have to be set at times if you have scarce resources. And a big portion of the work is obviously acquiring resources and allocating them to the impacted areas, and then also coordination with other emergency operations centers or emergency coordination centers in the impacted area. And last but not least, coordinating and informing elected officials about what is going on and how things stand. So we at the state EOC follow the incident command system, and this is Chris's Reader's Digest version of the incident command system, in that we typically have the functions of operations, planning, logistics, finance, and admin. The operations section is the section that basically works with the resources that are currently available to support the effort. The planning section is forward-looking and thinks about, okay, what is this going to look like tomorrow or in a couple of days or next week? Then the logistics section basically gets the resources. If we do not have them at the state level, the resources that are being requested, then the logistics section gets those resources. And last but not least, nothing is done until the paperwork is done. So the finance and admin section basically accounts for everything. In reality, it's a little bit more complex, and I'll get to that on the next slide. What we also have at the state EOC is that certain decisions have to be made at a policy level or at an executive level. And that's when we activate a so-called multi-agency coordination group, or we also refer to it as a policy group. So we may have representation from the governor's office here, from the National Guard, the Adjutant General or his designee may be joining this policy group, and then executive level members from select state agencies, again, depending on the nature of the incident. And some of the policies, aside from the policies that are set here, critical resource prioritization happens here in this policy group, and also strategic messaging about what kind of situation we're dealing with. So as I mentioned before, in reality, in this ICS organization, it's a little bit more complex, but what you can identify here on this chart again is the operations section, planning section, logistics section, and the finance and admin section. And you heard mentioned before of so-called emergency support functions. The vast majority of our emergency support function at the state level are within the operations section. And you heard before the mention of emergency support function 1, which is transportation, and emergency support function 9, which is search and rescue. And you also heard Greg Moore mention the air operations branch. So you have the air operations branch here in the operations section. You have ESF1, transportation is in here, and search and rescue is in here. And the emergency support functions that are activated in any given incident again, depend on the nature and the complexity of the incident. So this is something that is determined fairly early on when we partially or fully activate the state EOC.
Wow.
So our state EOC is always activated at one level or another. So we're a 24-hour operation at Camp Murray. The lowest level, blue sky level, if you will, is level 3, or what we refer to as monitoring. And that is basically our alert and warning center that is staffed 24 hours with 2 duty officers, or state emergency operations officers, as we call them. And then if something happens that exceeds what the alert and warning center can handle with their standard operating procedures, then we either partially or fully activate the state EOC, and then again determine which emergency support functions are needed depending on the nature of the incident. Right now, our state EOC is currently fully activated and has been for over 400 days since January 26th of last year because of the COVID-19 response. We are operating for the most part virtually because of COVID and protecting our own employees and making sure that we can, remain operational without taking the SEOC out. So this is a picture of the Alert and Warning Center. What we have here are numerous telephony-based, radio frequency-based, or internet-based public alert and warning and communication systems. And as I said, we always have 2 duty officers on duty at the same time. If you look at this room, we basically have 2 workstations, and the 2 workstations and the 2 sides of the room are mirror images of each other, but they are on separate power circuits and separate uninterruptible power supplies, so that if we would have any kind of failure there, that at least 1/2 of the room would still be working. So these folks basically provide notification, alert, warning, and resource coordination for natural hazards, technological hazards, and acts of terrorism. They deal with about 5,000 incidents annually in the Alert and Warning Center. Most common incident in the state of Washington that they deal with are hazardous material spills. We have anywhere between 2,500 and 3,000 hazardous material spills a year in the state of Washington. Another large category that was mentioned earlier are search and rescue missions. We have anywhere between 600 and 900 search and rescue missions a year. And in the state of Washington, basically, while search and rescue is executed under the auspices of local law enforcement, typically sheriff's departments and volunteer organizations, okay, any resource coordination, additional resource coordination, in addition to the resources that a local jurisdiction has itself, goes through our Alert and Warning Center. So if a jurisdiction, for example, is seeking federal air assets in support of a search and rescue mission, that request comes from the local jurisdiction to our Alert and Warning Center. We have a very limited number of air assets for search and rescue in state, in Snohomish and King counties. And for the most part, then our Alert and Warning Center will start working with the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center in Tyndall Air Force Base to get those air assets in. So they in the Alert and Warning Center have over 100 standard operating procedures for all kinds of things, to include unidentified flying object sightings. Okay. We're still working on the zombie attack procedure. That one doesn't exist yet.
Oh.
All right. And then if, something exceeds what the alert and warning center can do, then we make a decision whether we partially or fully activate the EOC and what emergency support functions have to be activated, and by extension, which state agency representatives have to come into the EOC. And then at some point when the EOC is operational, when the people are there, the alert and warning center hands the incident off to the EOC, and then the alert and warning center goes back to doing its regular business of dealing with everything else that is happening around the state. And we on the EOC floor then own that incident from there on out. So that is it in a nutshell. If anybody has any questions with regard to that, I would be happy to answer those. I would have some questions that we may potentially want to tee up in the discussion afterwards. And basically what I'm just giving you here are examples where we would envision using the Civil Air Patrol, just different types of scenarios. So one of the scenarios could be nothing really going on around the state. The state EOC is at level 3, just monitoring. And in connection with the planning effort that the Emergency Management Division is conducting, we would like to have some aerial imagery just in connection with the planning effort. So it's not an emergency or anything. That is one scenario. And we actually did this a couple of years ago in connection with the Howard Hansen Dam in Washington, where the Civil Air Patrol provided a lot of aerial imagery. Then, if the EOC is partially or fully activated, okay, and we, for example, need aerial imagery in connection with the landslide that occurred, and there was some damage, then in that partial or full activation, we will have activated ESF1, which is transportation, and depending on the situation, also ESF9, which is search and rescue. And as far as air assets go, both in ESF1 and ESF9, in the state EOC, it's the Department of Transportation's aviation division that basically handles that. So they would then, ESF1 would be reaching out to the Civil Air Patrol. And then the third scenario from my perspective is the state EOC is in a full activation, but we are now talking about a catastrophic incident, something like a Cascadia subduction zone, earthquake, and potential tsunami. So now that is typically, you know, a type of scenario where that is elevated all the way to the federal level. And at the state EOC, we have a joint response with representation from FEMA and federal agencies that work side by side with the state, okay? And now in connection with that scenario, we would need all kinds of things, aerial imagery, communication, search and rescue, whatever, okay? But in that type of scenario, now that we're in joint operations, the Civil Air Patrol now to us is truly a federal resource, which means that our request from the state goes to FEMA, and from there it is then mission assigned to DOD and ultimately the Air Force and the Civil Air Patrol. So these are just, you know, examples of scenarios in which we would engage in getting a hold of the Civil Air Patrol to support us.
That's excellent. I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to talk about something in maybe in the partial activation section. If we have time, go to the full activation as far as how you guys would work with that. But I have a question, like you guys have been activated now for 400 some days with COVID. My question is, if you have another incident that would be like, say, level 2 or maybe even level 1, can you do simultaneous missions? So you have a major air crash or a flood or that type of thing. Can you do that?
We handle these concurrently, these incidents. We just may have to activate additional emergency support functions. But, you know, throughout this past year, while we were having the COVID response, we had several incidents of civil unrest throughout the state. We had wildfires throughout the summer. Okay, so we handle them concurrently.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate that. We'll definitely bring you back into the discussion when we start at the scenario level. But I'd like to move on now to Colonel Ernie Schnabler wearing in this case. I'm sorry.
Just a question. I'm sorry. We have a question from a cadet Airman Basic Johnson asks, will the Civil Air Patrol be working with ECS 09 during these missions? And Cadet Airman, you can actually unmute yourself if you want to ask the question directly.
So yeah, I was just wondering if the ES09 would be working in correlation with the Civil Air Patrol during such missions such as search and rescue or aerial imagery and all that.
Yes, so absolutely. If we are, you know, in the state EOC, if we are at a level 2 or a level 1, then we will have emergency support function 1 activated as part of the operations section, okay, or ESF9 search and rescue. And then depending on which mission you are supporting, you would be folded into that emergency support function in the EOC.
Good question. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's excellent. We will definitely come back to you, Chris. So I appreciate it. We'll go ahead and definitely be talking more about how the EOC for the state, you know, works with it when we get into the scenarios. But for now, Colonel Ernie Schnabler, I'm going to have him start and tell us what he's doing, primarily wearing his Cowlitz County emergency management hat. Go ahead.
Thank you, Wally. Good afternoon. Ernie Schnabler, Cowlitz County Emergency Management Director. I report directly to the Sheriff's Office. We handle the full gamut of emergency management. So it's preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery for the whole county and the 5 cities in the county. We were talking about natural disasters, and I want to start with that. Of course, the big elephant in the room is always the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And we will have in next year, we'll have Cascadia Rising 2022 coming up, which is going to be a huge statewide exercise involving not just local, state, but also federal partners and NGOs and Civil Air Patrol and other volunteer organizations. Very, very important. We really, one of our real big objectives is to educate the general public as to how to prepare and how to mitigate against a 9.0 earthquake that Cascadia Rising represents. Because we all realize that when it comes to that, we will be isolated in Cowlitz County, and it will take at least 2 weeks, if not 3 or 4 weeks, for any outside help to reach us. So that is really important, that folks out there in the communities understand that they have to be prepared to provide their own food, water, medication, and all these other things in order to sustain without any outside help for at least 2 weeks. And that's what we're telling them. Best is for 4 weeks. But But the bread and butter natural emergencies, natural hazards that occur with us are really basically the floods, the winter weather, the storms. And of course, as some of you probably realize, we have three large dams that if they break, we have a huge disaster on our hands. We got a lively, fortunately, almost a snoozing volcano in our backyard, which actually is in Skamania County. But if it erupts, it really does not affect Skamania County as much as it does my county. So we got plenty of hazards in our county that are not as critical as the earthquake scenario. But we use the earthquake scenario because if you're prepared as a citizen and a resident in Cowlitz County, you're prepared for the 9.0 Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, you'll be doing just fine in the flood and the storms and the winter and so on and so forth. So when it comes to 24/7, 365, we are the level 3, just like the duty officers at the State Emergency Management Division. I have 3 people. We have 3 people in my department. And as I mentioned, we report to the sheriff's office. We're part of the sheriff's office. And there's one of us is always on duty. So if something happens that goes out above and beyond the normal MVA, motor vehicle accidents, the normal small flooding, the normal small type 4, type 5 hazardous materials things, like a tanker truck leaking something, then the 911 calls come in and they handle that at the regular level. But if something goes a little bit above and beyond that, the 911 dispatch center will page or call one of our duty officers, one of our 3 folks, and one is always on duty. And then we kind of assess and lean forward and see what incident command on scene needs. And we kind of start looking downrange what might come of this incident. So say, for instance, if it's something that has to do with one of the dams, let's say this is Merwin up in the Lewis River Dam has a problem. And then what I do right away, or what one of us as a duty officer at the local level does right away, we call the state duty officer and we let them know what we have at our hands. Whether or not we need any resources or whether or not we're declaring an emergency, I just want to let the duty officer at the state level know what kind of situation we have, so that they have situational awareness, they know what we are doing, and they can already start thinking at the state level, hey, if Ernie has this happening and if this goes south, then the next thing he's going to ask us is this, and this, and this, and then the state can already kind of lean forward and has an idea of what's coming down the pike in terms of requests from my local community, from my office. I enjoy working with the state folks, and Chris can probably attest to that. And Chris is a good friend of mine, and we can speak Switcherdeutsch. And I like to do that. But in any case, to make a long story short, when it comes to requesting resources from the state, you need to have a local declaration of emergency in place. And Chris already mentioned that. Just like Chris, I think we're just shy of 400 days of activation for COVID-19 at my office. I think we are at 394 or something like that. We have been doing that for the last almost 400 days. That I have been able to submit weekly requests for personal protective equipment. It's usually masks, mostly masks, but there was gowns and sanitizer and gloves and so on and so forth. On a weekly basis, I'm sending a request for those items to the logistics section at the State Emergency Operations Center. So we've been doing that for the almost 400 days, and it keeps on going, and it works very well, of course. What else did I want to tell you? As I said before, we're continuously at a stage at a level 3 activation, with one of us always being on duty. But we also spool up. Almost 400 days ago, and I remember precisely, it was March 16th last year, we activated right away to a level 1, our EOC, in response to COVID. And immediately we started supporting a type 1 team that we activated in Cowlitz County, a type 3 team. And that incident management team was handling all the responses to COVID. It was an extremely difficult time because personal protective equipment, PPE, was in extremely short supply. And the response, the IMT was responding very, very frantically, actually spooled up to even a level 2, where the incident management team, all recruited from the local level under the incident command system. This incident management team worked until end of June, when everything kind of started to simmer down, and PPE became again more available, and then everything was put back into the lap of our emergency management department. And ever since then, we've been working not just on the PPE side, we've been supporting the testing sites for COVID-19. We've been supporting the now recently all the mass vaccination site. And when it came to the mass vaccination site, we needed to have volunteers. And the volunteers I work with in Cowlitz County are really the bread and butter that we rely on. We couldn't really respond in emergencies in our county would it not be for volunteers. And Civil Air Patrol is obviously part of our Search and Rescue Council, and part of our we call it the Search and Rescue Council, but they help us in all kinds of things. Also together, of course, with the Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office Search and Rescue Team, and also dear to my heart are my Aries Races folks, our ham radio operators, who, and it was mentioned before, communications is so important, and that their radio communications capabilities are tremendous. They also our drone team with 5 or 6 drones that are really busy. They practice every week. And also we have a dive rescue team. Civil Air Patrol really stepped up when we needed to have a traffic and communications support at the vaccination site. And in fact, tomorrow on Sunday, we have another go on vaccinations, and they will be there again. And they've been there for the last 8 weeks, I think, 2 days a week, supporting our efforts. Really appreciate it, and I can't thank them enough. Outstanding group of folks. What else did I want to tell you? SAR missions. When it comes to search and rescue, of course, the first thing is a 911 call comes into our dispatch center at Cowlitz County saying, hey, missing this guy or that guy. And when it comes to, and then of course, it's the sheriff's responsibility for ground search and rescue. But pretty quickly, it becomes also an aviation resource request that goes up to the State Emergency Operations Center or to the duty officer at State EMD. And while we haven't really flown a lot of fixed wing Civil Air Patrol search and rescue support, we have in the past very successfully used the Civil Air Patrol's cell phone forensic team. And I'm really excited about the capabilities that they bring to the fight. And let's see, and that's really all I have right now. Communications, what I said before, is really, really important. And I know that Civil Air Patrol has, of course I know, that Civil Air Patrol has tremendous communications capabilities. We are my ham radio operators and Civil Air Patrol, we work a lot together, at least once a year, if not twice. We do search and rescue exercises together. And that always works. And for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, we've been doing that very, very successfully. And it kind of already kind of collaboration. And we want to do that in exercises so that when we really need them, we have all our ducks in a row and we know each other, and it's much easier and a much smoother response when the real mission, when a live mission comes to bear. And that's really all I have at this point. I'll put it back to you, Wally.
So that's going to be better. Now I can actually talk. Thanks, Colonel Schnabler. That's excellent. We'll come back to you in the scenario section wearing your CAP hat and about what kind of actions that the commander at the wing level does in response. But I actually have a little question really regarding governance, and that's this one, where the sheriff actually has authority and jurisdiction for a lot of kind of scenarios, search and rescue, lost hiker, those kind of things. But when you have a medical crisis like we have at COVID, how do you activate the county emergency operations center for a medical issue? Do you have to get a nod from the sheriff to open your EOC, or do you also co-work with your health department? How does that work?
No, I can't speak for any other county jurisdictions, but my sheriff is a hands-off kind of guy. Of course I let him know when I activate the EOC, but if it's not a law enforcement issue, then he's not in really knowing about what's going on, and I don't have a representative. For COVID, it really started out with our public health department, which is called Health and Human Services. And they needed some help regarding planning and getting the ducks in a row. And public health, their skills and their capabilities are more on the health side than on implementing an incident command system and putting an EOC together. So the beginning of March, we contacted our public health director. I did, and I said, whatever you need, let me know. And very quickly, she came back to us and said, "I need you."
Help,
and,
yeah.
And so then, of course, state was already activated, and then we just let state know, and pretty much on a regular basis, we brief the state up. And as I said before, every week we are requesting logistical support, and we have, of course, also our weekly. Now we have weekly conference calls with Chris. But in the heat of the battle a year ago, we had conference calls several times a week with the state and all the other jurisdictions in Washington State. No, I don't need the nod of the sheriff. I let him know. I report to the sheriff, but somebody needs to take command and get going and get your ducks in a row so we can assist those that need to be in the operational field.
That's excellent. So you have his confidence, and you have the authority to go ahead and do what you need to do. You just keep him in the loop, and he says, "No, I don't want to do that." He'd tell you.
Affirmative.
Okay, excellent.
We
Well,
have a question. Sorry. We have a quick question from Second Lieutenant Ted Schmidt. He asked if your drone team includes CAP's drone team, or is it two separate things?
They're two separate things. We have not really practiced with them yet. The unit, the Civil Air Patrol unit we work with is Clark County right now, because the Mount St. Helens Squadron, I don't know, has folded in Kelso. So we are working with the Fort Vancouver Squadron, and I think they're going to be starting up a drone team, but I really don't know 100% for sure. And when that happens, of course, we'll be working together.
And that is correct. We're going to stand one up.
Thank you, Sid.
Yeah, very good. Okay, before we move on to Colonel Moore, what we're going to do right now, because we've been sitting here for about an hour and 15 or hour and 20. Everybody's been sitting. I would ask everybody if they would just stand up, stretch a little bit, and then sit back down, and we'll go ahead and then start with the next speaker after we do that. So I'm going to go. Everybody gets up.
Well, we take a 3-minute break. So if people need to run out, move a little bit, it's 3:17 when we start back at 3:20.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and mute now. We'll be back in just a few seconds. It's a good opportunity for everybody to get a stretch and they don't get what we call sitting hypoxia.
Well, some people are gone and some people are here. I wanted to check if everybody was able to see the slide, but also the panelists on the little windows that show the people. You either have it at the top or on the side. Is everybody okay with that, or do you need help changing your window setting?
Everything worked fine on my end. I thought it was great.
Perfect. Okay. So just want to double check, make sure everybody's okay. Thank you. And you're next, Lieutenant Colonel Moore. Be ready.
Well, I got an appointment. I got an appointment in 5 minutes to get my hair done. So.
Oh my goodness. I think if you arrive a couple of minutes late, they will. That won't make much of a difference. Sorry.
Well, I was going to get a haircut. It was this one right here. I had this other one cut last week. So, you can only get one haircut at a time.
Well, Colonel Moore, this is the Lieutenant Colonel Wallace again. If you really have a hair appointment, which I can see you really need one, then let me know when you need to go. But we'll adapt to whatever we need to do.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Excellent.
We could send you a salon specialist if you wanted.
Actually, the only thing I was going to do is I got Amazon bring me another drone today. So I was going to go out and check the porch and see what he got here. And if so, I'm going to go fly it tomorrow.
Well, you still have a minute to go check your front porch.
It's okay.
Don't want anybody to pick it up. That would be really bad.
Amazon don't get here usually till about 8 o'clock at night, usually where I live. So.
Yeah, even past 8 o'clock, depending where you're located. In our area, they will deliver up to like about 9 p.m., which is like sometimes really surprised. It's like just a little bit past 9 and I have a delivery at my door. I'm like, okay, it's dark.
The problem is if I wasn't checking, it was sitting out there right now, I wouldn't come back. My screen will go blank and you go like, where's Carl? Where is he?
He has his new toy. Sorry.
I actually offered, they were talking about Clark County and Fort Vancouver. I actually contacted them the other day. I was going to go down next week and see if they wanted some training, but they said they're busy. So they got some other stuff going on down there. And so
yeah,
we're going to say that a little later on.
Yeah. With COVID-19, there's a lot going on. It's kind of hard to sometimes have so many at the same time.
Yeah.
Colonel Moore, quick question as far as I know, your unit is the wing, correct?
I'm at wing headquarters.
Your headquarters. So, and I don't know exactly when we get entered the phase that we actually will start moving toward meeting in person at the wing on a weekly basis rather than just the I think they use Uber conference or Zoom or whatever. Yeah, whatever the virtual process is. But when we start back and we go in person, I want to get together with you in person, and I've got some equipment maybe to donate that you might want to use for your drone program.
It'd be great. I appreciate it if you get a chance sometime this week, if you would just take some photos of them, of what you got, and let me see so I can kind of evaluate where we're going to go with that and how we could use it and what we can do. Yeah.
Very, very good. I'd be happy to do that because I don't know, do you physically live in the Seattle area or?
No, I live up in Bonnie Lake. I live in the east part of Pierce County, just outside of Bonnie Lake.
Pierce County. Okay, well, good. Well, we'll figure that out later. Okay, with thanks for everybody taking a quick break. For no further ado, I'll introduce Lieutenant Colonel Carl Moore. And what I'd like you to do is start out really with your experience as a former WashDOT employee and work with FEMA. And then after you're done with that, then we'll go ahead and work a few scenarios, and I'll get the whole gang working on that, and we'll get some questions from the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, I think everybody's heard the expression, been there, done that. Well, the CAP, that should be their motto. CAP has always been there and has always done everything. I started on CAP when I was 13. When I was 15, I got to go on my first SAR mission. That's when I really got hooked on search and rescue and all the different aspects. 17, I joined the Air Force, spent 25 years in the Air Force, traveled around the world, different countries, name it. And I still stay with CAP and got still involved with CAP emergency services in different parts of the world and different parts of the United States. In 93, I got out of the Air Force, came back, retired, started as a volunteer and employee at the Museum of Flight Seattle. At one point, I wound up actually getting hired by the state WashDOT Aviation Division. Some of you have been around for a while. You know there was some issues back then in the decades ago, and I was one of those guys that they recruited. They called me up at the Museum of Flight and said, "Hey, there's some problems, and there's some organizations that are having issues working together." And it turned out that I used to be a member of most of all those organizations that were involved. So they said they thought I was kind of somewhat of a neutral party in there somehow. So I got involved with that. I worked with the State Aviation Division as the Air SAR coordinator for about 4 years. We did about 21 air search and rescue missions, full-blown air rescue, search and rescue missions. We had 9/11 happen. We had the Nisqually earthquake happen. Earlier, I heard somebody talking about transportation getting to the Camp Murray to state EOC. When 9/11 happened, I actually was driving to get to Camp Murray because that was my responsibility working for the aviation division, to go work at the aviation desk at Camp Murray at the Emergency Operations Center. So I got called down there for that. And traffic from the Coma Dome all the way to Camp Murray down by Fort Lewis, for those of you who are not in this local area, you don't know that. It's about 8 or 9 miles. So I put my Jeep in 4-wheel drive and I drove that last 8 or 9 miles in the ditch, in the grass and the mud, all the way to Camp Murray. Later on, when the Nisqually earthquake happened, I got called up again, said, "Hey, you need to get down to the state EOC, Camp Murray. You're the aviation division representative. You're going to do the air SAR coordination part at the state." And I was flying at the time, and I was in the Cessna 182, and I wound up getting to talk to control tower guys at Fort Lewis and let me land at Fort Lewis because McCord wouldn't let me land. And I wound up getting an Army major in a Humvee to drive me over to Camp Murray. So I spent the Camp Murray. So basically, it is difficult to get to Camp Murray during a disaster because the roads are closed. And it's even if you're across like you're up in Kitsap County or something like that, you got the problem with the bridge. As I said, I've been officially retired since '93. I've worked as all kinds of different aviation type jobs, coordinated with different things with the Civil Air Patrol. Like I said, my first thing when I came back out of the service, come back to Washington, was to be emergency services officer for the wing and also vice wing commander and a lot of other different jobs, DO and things like that. But it always stayed in tune with the emergency services side of it. My big role right now as the assistant wing emergency service officer is I'm the chief check pilot and chief instructor for drones for the Civil Air Patrol here in Washington. And we've been using drones on a regular basis. In the past year alone, just since COVID started, I've done actually 50 check rides. So doing a check ride, the COVID's not a real big problem because like I said, we're doing it one-on-one, going out, traveling around the state. 2 weeks ago, I was over in Spokane. Wherever you need to go, we'll go out and do the check rides using government provided drones. My background in CAP involved a lot of different emergency service activities, not only with the State Aviation Division, with other states and with the Air Force and with the Coast Guard and FEMA. I'll give you a couple of examples. Last year we had the lake, the fires up here at Bonnie Lake. Well, I live at Bonnie Lake. I'm a volunteer with the Pierce County Sheriff's Department, and I'm a volunteer at Pierce County Emergency Management. So during the Bonnie Lake fires, the first night I was out there, we were using our Sheriff's Department 4x4 unit volunteers to go out and evacuate people. The next couple of days, I was working in our mobile command post that was set up on site in Sumner for the fires. When I had the Ozo mudslides, I was actually working out with the county emergency operations folks with the urban search and rescue task force, helping them out. And I was working as a truck driver, kind of wearing a dual hat. When I was stationed in New Jersey, actually as a Civil Air Patrol pilot, me and another guy, we flew aerial radiological monitoring for the 3 Mile Island nuclear hazard disaster that happened there. As far as I know, we were the only 2 people ever that actually flew radiological airborne monitoring. That's a long story right there. I also participated with CAP and working with the counties. When we had years ago, we had the floods down at Chehalis, Centralia area. We went down there for a couple weekends. I helped out the squadron down there. One weekend we went down there, we were helping with traffic control, keeping people out of the area, telling them when the roads were closed. Another weekend we went down there, we were driving around delivering water, delivering generators, delivering food and stuff like that, helping people out. Big thing last year, January, we had the Puerto Rican earthquake, or there was a series of earthquakes, probably a couple hundred earthquakes that went off. Myself and Carl Wiley, the other drone check pilot here and instructor here for CAP use of drones, we went to Puerto Rico for 10 days. We went to Cuenca, Harvey earthquake down there, and we flew drones. We took something like 14,900 pictures using drones over a 10-day period. Our team and the other teams that were sent to FEMA to provide them background information for making their decisions on what need to be done. We got back from Puerto Rico. It was an exciting adventure. We couldn't take any of our regular CAP drones because they were not Air Force certified. So we wind up getting military surplus drones, Army surplus drones to be used down there that were sanctioned. And when we got back, we went back for about a week. And then he said, would you like to go to Pago Pago? And like, where's Pago Pago? Well, that's American Samoa. It's an American territory, and they were hit by a typhoon. So we deployed down there with drones and working with the folks down there. We first got to Hawaii. We went to Fort Shafter, met up with the FEMA people and the Army Reserve and the Air Force Reserve and all the federal agencies at Fort Shafter there in near Honolulu. And we briefed them, they briefed us. And then we spent about a week sitting there in Hawaii because the typhoon was so bad down in Pago Pago, the runway was still closed. We were supposed to fly by a naval aircraft down into Pago Pago out of Hawaii. But we couldn't get in there because Navy wouldn't be able to fly us in. I kept telling them to fly us into an aircraft carrier and then let the Navy SEAL team take us outshore with the Zodiacs, but they didn't like that idea. I thought that would be kind of a cool adventure, but I'm always looking for some fun. But again, I volunteer with Pierce County Search and Rescue, and I volunteer at Pierce County Emergency Management. And working with these folks, they're really great. Of course, we're under the auspices, like I said, with the Search and Rescue, we're under the auspices of the Sheriff's Department, which has been explained in great detail so far for the past hour or so. Again, CAP has always been involved with something, whether it's the state, whether it's the federal level, whether it's at the county level, whether it's the municipal level. CAP is out there. And again, just like some other people, I've been involved with the COVID drive-through type sites and stuff like that. And I'm so impressed with the CAP. Like I said, I started out when I was 13 years old, and I ain't never leaving. You guys are going to have to drag me out. There's so many new adventures. It never gets boring. You wanted to know more about the aviation division. Basically, with the aviation division job, the way it worked for search and rescue back in, what was it, like 20 years ago, what would happen is an airplane would say disappear, somebody go fly on a Saturday. The plane would be gone. It was without a flight plan. Nobody really knew it was missing. Usually on Monday morning, somebody, a coworker, a boss, or a family member would be curious, like, okay, where's Bill? You know, what happened to him? He hasn't come to work today. He hasn't showed up, or he didn't show up for his birthday party yesterday, whatever. So the family and friends all go out, do their own search. And this is typical of most all the searches during that era, was the fact that the family would go out or friends would go out and look for the pilot. And then they would not call the authorities. They would not make that call to 911 until probably around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. And that's when the FAA goes out and they do their thing. And basically, for those of you who are not too familiar with the system, there's a thing called the ALNOT, the alert notification, and there's an INREC, which is an information request. And this is basically the FAA spending time trying to contact all the airports and air traffic control facilities, trying to find out if anybody's heard from this airplane. And if you take off from, say, Seattle Boeing Field in a Cessna 172, you can fly on a full tank of gas as far as California and as far north as Alaska. And you can fly all the way to Montana on a single tank of gas. So that's a lot of areas, a lot of places to be looking for an aircraft. And there've been a lot of phone calls and a lot of, back then there was a lot of phone calls back in, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Nowadays we got the internet, which makes it a lot simpler and easier. Well, usually what happens is on Monday night, after the FAA's done their thing, they go contact the Air Force Rescue Center. And I'm talking from basically just looking at the standard procedures, about 80, 90% of the time, this is what would happen. They contact AFRCC. AFRCC would say, okay, they would ask the state. And as I was an employee of the state, even though I was in the CAP, they would ask me as an employee of the state. They say, we got a search and rescue mission out there. Here's what we know. Here's all the facts. Here's all the information we're going to pass on to you that we have available at this time. And that includes doing things like credit card checks, make sure the person didn't buy fuel at an airport in Boise or something like that. And then we would have to make a decision. Do we have the resources in the state of Washington to go out and conduct a search? Does the aviation division have enough assets to conduct a search? Well, we had the WARSAR, the Washington Air Search and Rescue Group, that was part of originally under the WPA, Washington Pilot Association, I believe. And we had a limited number of pilots and aircraft, and they were the best. I mean, there were people out there, I got names that these people should go in the Hall of Fame because they were so good at what they did and how they did it. But there was a limited number. And if you're looking for a person in an airplane that could be anywhere within 5 or 6 states, what you need to do is you need more airplanes in the air, you need more boots on the ground. So that's when I'd have to tell the Air Force and say, look, I am the state Air Star coordinator, and I can tell you right now that I could only provide maybe 6 aircraft or 7 aircraft or 2 radio operators from civilian resources here in the state volunteers. I need Civil Air Patrol. And that's when AFRC comes back and says, okay, we want you to say that. Tell us that you need federal assets. And then they go, okay, fine, we do this. They give us a mission number. I contact the state EOC at Camp Murray, and I called up the duty officer, and you saw that slide there with the warning and alerting center. I called the duty officer and said, hey, this is Carl. Guess what? We got to search for missing aircraft. Blah, blah, blah. Give as much information as I can. Can I please have a state number? Because then I provide the Civil Air Patrol with the Air Force assigned mission number, and I provide all the other volunteers and everybody with the state number. And of course, wherever we're going to set up the search base, whatever airport, whether it's Puyallup, Yakima, Wenatchee, we get involved, right? We do what we can to get involved with the county sheriff's department, because it's been brought up already that air search and rescue, the air search is everything above the ground. Anything on the ground, touching the ground, it belongs to the sheriff's department. Local law enforcement is responsible for what I would normally call the recovery phase. So we go out, look for an aircraft, we spot it, we see the airplane down somewhere. That's when we tell the sheriff, and they usually have a sheriff liaison at our command post, whether it's a state aviation command post or a CAP command post, saying, hey, here's the coordinates, here's the location of the aircraft. It's on you. What do you want us to do? That's when they tell the Civil Air Patrol, can you provide an aircraft overhead for communications? Can you provide this support? Can you provide radio relay? Can you provide whatever assets, resource they need? But once we've identified the aircraft being on the ground, as a state aviation division, I'm kind of that area command type level in the ICS system where I have to coordinate between the CAP and the local authorities, making sure that nobody steps on each other's toes. Usually the only time we ever had any conflicts was between the counties. We had a search once where the plane crashed on a county line, and 2 different sheriff's departments got an argument as to who is responsible to take care of it. But that's a different story. But that's pretty much that. Any questions at this time? Oh, you're muted, John. Oh, you're still muted.
There we go. Now that's
There you go.
better. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say that was excellent to work off to maybe my first scenario that we can all talk about as far as as far as that process. And what I'd like to do is take a theoretical airplane VFR Cessna 172 that departed VFR, with a regular FAA flight plan from Port Angeles in Washington all the way down to Portland, Oregon. In flight, so the time hasn't completed on the flight plan, but I'll say Colonel Schnabler his 911 gets a call that there is a there was a noise sounding like an airplane crash east of I-5, somewhere in his county, getting 911 where an air crash has occurred. What do you do with that? So let's go to Colonel Schnabler wearing his his EOC, and if you're getting a 911 call, who do you call?
Okay, so if 911 receives a call from a resident, it's a 911 call that says, hey, I've seen an airplane that just went over the hill. I heard the crash and I saw smoke, or maybe didn't see smoke, but just a crash. I would get the call, or one of the three of us would, whoever is on duty, or even if it's during the week, obviously during office hours, all three of us would know. But in any case, one of us would then immediately notify the duty officer at state level, and ask, and the duty officer has a protocol, and Chris can probably elaborate on that. Has a protocol to notify WashDOT, Aviation Division, and possibly any other state agencies. We would obviously be in touch with our sheriff's department, because 911 would already have dispatched both a sheriff's unit or maybe a police unit if it was within a city jurisdiction. But law enforcement would have been already dispatched to the location. The dispatch would, or 911 dispatch would have tried to get more information from whoever called, and maybe even already started activating EMS fire. So yeah, my notification would go to the state, and we would already starting to lean forward to saying, hey, if this really happened, what can we do to get more information? We might even trigger what's called a reverse 911, so to speak, call to the neighboring residences, asking for information if they have seen or heard anything, to give us a call back. Mm-hmm. And we would share that information with the responding agencies.
Okay, I got a question. If Gregory Moore from the FAA are you still on? You're probably like me, fumbling trying to find the mute button. Is Greg Moore from FAA still there? The WADS? Let's see. I'm not seeing him on there if he's still here.
He's on my screen.
Okay. Yeah, he's on mine too. Well, what I would ask the FAA, since the time hasn't stopped and this is going on in here, would he have any visibility from anyone that maybe there's an incident that has occurred, and or what happens like in a few minutes later that the flight plan now is timed out, when the FAA is starting to talk to the system, and who do they talk to?
Well, I would say that goes back to that alert request, information request, and also alert notification. Basically, what you're looking at is trying to find out if there's any air traffic control facilities, any airports, radar sites, whatever, that may have had some sort of contact with the aircraft. Even the weather people to check whether or not that airplane had made a call in for a flight saying, I'm over Richfield heading towards Spokane, and there's clouds ahead. What's the weather up ahead? I mean, everybody like that has got some sort of information to put into the system.
Okay.
If I could, while I'd add as well, one of the CEP members of the National Radar Assessment Team, NRAP, is right there at WADS as well with Greg Moore. And they've developed a system that is almost predictive of a aircraft crash like this. It's tracking and coalescing all those radar signatures and flight plans of airborne aircraft. If they see a vertical velocity that is significantly negative into the ground and then they lose the radar cell, that system automatically alerts them, and then they can go back and start this process as well. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's an amazing system. It really is.
We've had a lot of searches, and I'm an incident commander, incident one. I looked at a lot of those NTAPs, or tracking system things, and there's been a lot of searches where they took us right down to within 100 feet of where the airplane actually was found. You'll see the flight path, you'll see the aircraft you send, the little dots pop up and the timing, and then you'll see a spiral, or you'd actually tell where from those things where the airplane actually did its final stall.
Wow.
Extremely accurate.
Now on this one particularly, whether he's got an old style ELT or not, where would maybe where and when would maybe any of the telephone forensics start in for cell phones? See if the guy's got a cell phone, and would that come into play at all?
From my experience, it starts right away. We get as much information you can about the person. You try to find everything. You got a driver's license, there's credit. You try to find out what their business is, and where they may have gone. You'll try to find out their phone numbers and that kind of stuff, and then you run the system. In the earlier days of forensics, cell phone forensics, like 20, 30 years ago, when cell phones were still the old giant bricks that you had to carry with two hands.
Sure.
Basically, they did not want to start that forensics at that early. They'd wait till it was like you're desperate for it. Now it's pretty much, from what I've seen for the past couple of years, it's pretty much like automatic. It's like, hey, this is so simple. We got the experts out there, the people who have the software, have the firmware, the programs, the computers are all set up. It's like, oh, just give me the phone number. I'll take care of it. I'll call you back in a few minutes. There's other resources out there too that happened on a search years ago. We were looking for a plane that was up north of Port Angeles, and looking in the newspaper. Some of this is where you had to stay informed of what's going on. That's why I was working for the aviation division. We had a scenario where there was a situation we were suspecting on an airplane that had a problem, but I kept track of what was going on in the news, and I knew that the U.S. Navy out of Bremerton, Bangor, and the Canadian Navy was having a war games exercise out there in Puget Sound. Up in the Straits of Juan de Fuca. So I called in AFRCC and had them put me through to the Navy, and I said, hey, you guys got people out here and you're doing your war games. I know you got radars out there. Can you help me out? And they go, sorry, we cannot provide you any information. And then a couple hours later, I get a phone call back, and my dispatcher there at the mission base handed me a piece of paper with coordinates. And I said, where'd you get this from? And he says, I got a call from some Navy lieutenant. And that's all he said was he gave me the numbers. And we checked the numbers, and that's where the airplane was. Apparently they're out there tracking. And the same thing happens with over Yakima in Eastern Washington. The FAA radar system is not designed to look low level. It's designed to look at the airplanes, the big boys up high. When you get over on the other side, like Wenatchee Airport, you get down in the Cooley River area down there, and you get down in the Columbia River, and you get down to Yakima, FAA radar doesn't pick up aircraft low to the ground. But the Army out there has low-level radar mounted in their mobile vehicles that are used to keep track of their helicopters and their ground troops and their ground maneuvers out there at the Yakima range. And they're very cooperative. They've always been very cooperative and said, hey, we got an airplane missing in Eastern Washington somewhere. Is there any chance he'd flown through your airspace? It's just so many good resources nowadays. It's just amazing. That's why we don't have that many searches. Back then, When I was a younger guy, we had like, 6 searches, full-blown searches a year. Now it's like 1 every 6 years
Yeah,
for airplanes.
it's really changed. There's
Yeah.
no search and rescue much anymore. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Colonel Schnabler, wearing your hat when you had it as wing commander, and you have an active, you have an MI that's been issued for a search. Are you aware of it as are you in the loop at all as the wing commander, or is that really the operations side? Or do you get to see that?
Let me just quickly say, I'm kind of cringing all the time when somebody says, well, now we have a search every 6 years. We have ground searches like every other week because some idiots are going up in the snowy mountains. There's still snow up there and they're thinking, hey, it's warm down here in the valley. We'll just go up there and we don't have any clothes on, but hey, and of course there's usually some alcohol involved in that. So, but I digress. To answer your question, I think, first of all, let me preface my comments. I was a wing commander many years ago. It's over a decade now. When I was wing commander, I really entrusted the response, despite the fact that I was an ICS kind of guru at that point in time already, and a very operational guy, having been, a CD director and a CD mission pilot and flying hundreds of missions on CD ERAD, Marijuana ERAD at the time. I had to step back and kind of look at it from the top and manage the whole thing. I relied very heavily on the folks that were doing the operations. What I wanted to make sure at that point in time was that they are well trained in the incident command system, that we had a very good command and general staff kind of function that in accordance with the NIMS organization, that we could respond to any kind of mission that we were handed off by national to prosecute. So from my perspective, when it came to the actual mission, I was more or less hands off. But standing in the back and letting the incident commander know that whatever he or she needed to let me know without any delay, so I could make sure that I could support whatever they needed to have in order to facilitate an effective and efficient response to the mission. When it comes to non-actual mission response, I think the wing commander's responsibility is to, before a battle comes to bear, before a live mission actually comes up, that we have good training for the operational folks, especially as far as incident command system is concerned, that you have a good command and general staff, incident management team staffed, fully staffed up and trained, that you're providing them with the resources to have exercises so that they are always really sharp in executing and managing a mission. That they also reach out to the local emergency management, to the emergency response agencies such as fire, law enforcement, in order to establish relationships. Emergency response is all about relationships, and you got to build them while the poop is not hitting the fence.
Right.
And that needs to be done. When I was wing commander, I made sure that I had real close relationships and regular briefings with my staff, with the adjutant general, with folks at emergency management division. And of course, those were the days when we still were doing a lot of homeland security and counter drug operations. So we had real good relationships and kept the relationships going with things like the Customs and Border Patrol, with ICE, with the National Park Service, with DEA, with the Forest Service, and we created a lot of missions out of that. But yeah, that's what I'm looking for a wing commander to facilitate. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, because I want to know, as far as once you get to that level, how much do you know what's going on for actual missions, and that's very helpful. I want to talk now to Mr. Utzinger, Chris, as far as what kind of information, like in this scenario where you're getting a crash in another county, what kind of information are you getting both from the county, but more importantly, other information sources like the FAA or that where are you getting information?
So primarily, as Ernie mentioned, we're getting it primarily from local jurisdictions. Then if we truly have, an ELT go off or so, we will can get that from various sources. And our then first call is always to WASDOT to deal with that. There have been slight changes since Carl was there, in that actually that air SAR part within WASDOT is no longer in the WASDOT aviation, but in the WASDOT emergency services. But it's exactly the same function that, Carl was describing. It's just a different person in charge of that. Right now it's Tom Peterson, and he is then our go-to, and then starts initiating everything that Carl was mentioning before.
Excellent. Okay. So you're getting plenty of information that whatever you need, you can get from any source.
Right.
Very good. Very good. Let's see, back to, we haven't talked to Dean Richardson much about his CAP USAF role. When something like this occurs, when you have an incident, like say in a county, you've got an active mission number and a mission's going on, at what point are you aware of missions? Is it way after actions, or is there anything real time?
It usually is after actions for this specific scenario. Now that depends on how proactive the CAP USAF member, the regional operations director, is. We try and stay plugged in with the operations folks and the wing commander, so that we know if there's an incident going on, we can at least be monitoring that and see if there is some avenue that we can help assist the communication flow. I've had incidents in California where there were, let's say, some personality conflicts between the CP members and maybe an AFRCC controller, and we could help, facilitate some of that. We've also had some confusion on, and I think your scenario where the aircraft is going across state lines can present some confusion, because if the airplane has not had some indication that it is impacted the ground, or some witness observing that, or an ELT, I think across state lines would be primarily AFRCC responsibility. And so we've seen that. In fact, there was a search here in Washington recently, a year or two ago, where that can get a little bit messy, and we try and help if we can in that sense.
That's great. So you have some interaction. Okay. Well, we're getting down to about the last 5 or 6 minutes or so. So I'm going to turn back over to Colonel Komarsak, see if they have any chat or any questions that the audience has that they want to ask the panel. And
sorry, I am back.
Oh, good. Yeah. I thought you were muted just like I was. It's like, where is it?
Yeah, it's like, where's my cursor? I'm sorry. I'm kind of curious, like for the incident with the aircraft, does the FAA and the Western Air Defense System, do they have any connection? Do they do any interactions with CAP and the different partners of emergency response, or are they on the side? So that would be for Gregory Moore, if he's still available.
Still here.
Gregory Moore, are you still there, sir? Oh, you might have to step away from his He's saying, or maybe yeah, he might have stepped away, but maybe one of you will know. Does it's like if there's an ELT, I'm guessing the FAA is involved in one way or another, right? I'm not a pilot, I'm a geologist. Like I always say, the only thing that fly for me are rocks spitted by volcanoes. So I have limited knowledge of what happened on the on the airplane side. Sorry. So if there's an ELT, does the FAA get any notification, or and then do they interact with any of your emergency response partners? How does that work on their side?
Well, I'd be glad to jump in if you want on that one.
Yeah.
Basically, the ELT system with the new 406 beacons, basically what they do is they transmit a lot of information about the beacon. In the early days, the ELTs were basically just a signal, a radio sound that was picked up by satellite, and the satellites passed around the Earth about every 90 minutes, and they would, each time they passed over, there was about a footprint about 300 miles. So every time a satellite, one of the different satellites would pass over, and there's also some stationary satellites. What would happen is they'd be able to, every hour and a half or whatever the passes were, they'd be able to overlap all of the radiuses and basically narrow it down. And like I said, it's when the AFRC is the one of the mission control type units, because the satellite system is basically an international system. And the way it used to be, and I can't tell you what it is this afternoon, but it would go in through the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, who would basically pass that information on through the CAP resources, saying, hey, we got confidence that this is not a false alarm. It's not a test. It's not, something else. But the FAA really doesn't get involved with getting that information on that. The only way the FAA does get information would be if an aircraft, an airliner or something was flying, because a lot of airliners and even military aircraft, they will be monitoring the frequency, the beacon frequency, which is usually 121.5. And they would monitor that in the aircraft. And if they pick something up, they will call it in to the nearest air traffic control center, whoever they're talking to, and say, hey, I just flew over, Missoula, Montana, and I'm picking up a signal down here. I'm at 36,000 feet, and I can't tell you exactly, it could be in the United States, Canada, or wherever, but I'm just telling you, I got a signal, and I heard it for about 5 minutes. That would go through the FAA. That would go on through like the AFRCC. But as far as the satellite picking it up, that would not go through the FAA directly or anyway.
Mhm.
Then from the emergency management perspective, what I can say is there is not regular communication, for example, between us at the State EOC and the Western Air Defense Sector over at JBLM. It's only in very rare circumstances that we, and there is, I think, also some room for improvement, and we were working on that a little bit. But you have to understand they have a completely different mission set, basically, and different purpose. We were in discussion with them, you may recall, August 8th of 2 or 3 years ago, when the Alaska airline employee decided to take one of the aircraft on a joyride and then ditch it on Ketron Island. After that incident, we had some communication with them. However, our communication from the emergency management side is a lot closer and a lot more intense, obviously, with the FAA. So going back to that example, and another piece that is interesting for us is a couple of years in the Alert and Warning Center, a couple of years ago, we started integrating social media into our platforms that we observe, okay? And we actually noticed that incident on social media first. And our duty officers then immediately contacted the FAA to get an authoritative confirmation of what was going on. So we have since learned, the value of social media to get a first inkling of something going on, even if it's not necessarily authoritative, but you can pick up on it and then get with the authoritative source to confirm. So back to your original question, Major, our collaboration from emergency management is a lot closer with the FAA than it is with WADS.
That makes sense. It's like I expect connection with NORAD is more when there's either something military or something that we're talking about potential security, like, you know, some defense safety problem where we don't know, was it a terrorist that took over the aircraft or was just a joyride like it was really. Thank you. There's a question from Second Lieutenant Ted Schmidt. He has a question about squadron level disaster preparedness, and we probably will finish with that because we've reached our 4 o'clock. Lieutenant Schmidt, you may unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Major. Yes, I'm a second lieutenant with the Seattle Squadron. I'm the assistant communications officer, but recently this year, as we filled out our duty roster, I volunteered to take on the role of disaster preparedness officer. I appreciate all the folks on the panel today, but particularly for the CAP officers, I can't find an actual job description for that role. Is there anyone that knows where there'd be some material specifically for that role?
That's a good question.
My answer is, I don't know. Sorry.
Okay.
Aerospace education here. So I'll hand it over to Emergency Services Specialist, Lieutenant Colonel Carmore, please.
I knew that was going that way. You are correct. There is no direct regulation about disaster preparedness. What you basically, it all comes under emergency services officer. And with that, there's a lot of positions in there in emergency services and senior staff level functions, management functions that require the incident command system courses, the ICS courses. And basically you're going to pick up all that information that you're going to need as disaster preparedness from taking these ICS type courses, incident command system type courses. There's certain ones that are mandatory, and there's a lot of them that are optional. And most people who are involved with the management side, we wind up just taking them over and over and over again because it's a very complicated system and it's not that easy. And one thing I throw in there along that line, that it'd be helpful to you and also to the other people, even not CAP. I worked with AFRCC for them to come to Washington McCord next year in March and put on the basic inland search and rescue course.
Great.
And it's not only for CAP, but it's also for emergency management division, anybody, local law enforcement, search and rescue, search deputies, whatever. And we will get more information out by November, but I've already set a date for March, and stay tuned and I'll get you guys on the line and get you into the class.
Carl, by any chance, have you shared that information with our Chris Long, our state SAR coordinator?
Not yet. I know Chris Long. I worked with him for a long time, and I do plan on contacting everybody. I'm just giving you guys kind of a heads up right now because I know it's an opportunity in case I miss somebody. But there will be formal notification going out. We were supposed to have a class in January, but that got messed up because of the COVID. And so we've scheduled one for March of next year. But I do want everybody, because it's all about networking. It's not about us learning something. It's about us all getting together and speaking, just like we are today. We're all working together.
Can I make a quick comment to Lieutenant Schmidt? You know, one of the key parameters from my perspective is that when you talk about squadron level disaster preparedness, it is the individual preparedness, because if the individual squadron members are not prepared for 2 weeks in disaster preparedness for themselves, for their family, at home, at their office, in their car, they will not be any good for any response for the community to go through a disaster response. So it's a personal preparedness that we need to make sure that all our CAP members are prepared for 2 weeks to be sustaining their own life for themselves and for their family. So that is really key. And we got to go out, we got to use our platform as Civil Air Patrol members to preach that to all our friends, family, and whoever else is willing to listen to us.
Okay, I appreciate that, Colonel. Yeah, last year I did put together a presentation for our squadron based on the FEMA publication of Are You Ready?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I think that's a great thing to do. And I think it's great advice from the Colonel. And I want to thank all the panel participants for this. This is going to be a great exercise to share with the aerospace education folks that are in our audience to really understand a little bit about what the emergency side does. And I think this particular panel has been great to be able to kind of give a good introduction about what all these various entities do, and how the ES side within Civil Air Patrol works. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I want to thank all the panelists, all the participants, and our conductor, I should say, Major Komarsak, has done a fantastic job about putting all this together, and I sure appreciate all of her help.
I want to thank everybody. Thank you especially to our panelists for taking time out of your life to come and educate us. And we learned a lot. I know we still have a lot to learn, but you gave us a pretty good picture to start from. And I want to thank you very, very much for that. And we're very lucky to have all of you coming and giving us the different perspective of that world. I want to thank the attendees for your participation. If you have any further questions or comments, you are always welcome to contact me. I'm Sylvie Kasmarsik at wawing.cap.gov. It's also on the website. And our moderator was Lieutenant Colonel John Wallace. You can contact him at John Wallace at wawing.cap.gov. Also, there are dots between first name and last name. Thank you very, very much for everything. And like I say, don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or requests. And thank you, everybody, for a great presentation. Thank you for all the panelists also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a quick poll. If the attendants can please go through that, and that will be the end. And I want to thank you for your patience as we've gone over a few minutes. Thank you.